Hello and welcome back once again to After the Credits. So, again, catching up on semi-newer movies, and today we got around to seeing something that's been open a week or two now, and that is, actually maybe a week, and that is Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. I think I got that title right. If not, I apologize. So before I get started on this review, let me state I have not read the book. I don't know how it differs from the book. I don't know what the story of the book was. So I'm only going to be reviewing this based solely off of the film that I just saw. So what did I think of the film? It wasn't quite what I expected. At the same time, it wasn't necessarily bad. I just felt there could have been more to it. It starts out seeming like it's actually going to be kind of more of an adult-oriented film. And not necessarily that it's going to be like R-rated or anything like that, but that it's going to deal with more adult concepts. And then it does this hard shift into a tween movie, which isn't bad. It's just, like I said, there could have been more to the story if it had stuck with the more mature themes of it as opposed to switching to kid mode. So to better explain what I mean by that, I'll tell you basically how the movie starts. There's this kid working at a store, and he gets a call, and it's from his dad that he wants him to go check on his grandfather because his grandfather possibly has dementia. And, they're kind of worried about him because he's not answering the phone, or when he does, he's talking strange. And the guy, I think, was out of town or something, so he couldn't go check on his dad himself, so he sent his son to check on him. So by the time the kid gets there, it's kind of late, it's dark out, there's some strange things going on in the neighborhood. And he finally gets to his grandfather's house, he goes inside, and everything's a mess, and the back door is, broken open. So he realizes there was a break-in, so he asks his coworker who drove him there, we might need to get the police out here. She goes, hold on, I got a gun in the car, let me get it just to be safe. And he goes looking around and finds his grandfather in the woods, and at first he thinks he's dead. And then his grandfather kind of talks to him for a minute, and he's like, I'm sorry, I should have told you sooner, stuff like that. The grandfather ends up dying, and as the kid turns around, he sees what he thinks is a monster, and then when the lady who was with him turned around, she says there's nothing there, and then it's gone. So this kind of puts the kid into therapy, and he's seeing the psychiatrist, and he's like, I could have swore there was something there, but there wasn't. And the psychiatrist's like, in times of great distress, our minds can make things up. And he starts telling her about his relationship with his grandfather, about how he used to tell him stories about these monsters from back when he was a kid and all this stuff. And she goes, well, right there, your grandfather implanted this idea of these monsters in your head, so when something bad happened to him, your subconscious relayed that, even though you're old enough to realize that that's not true anymore, your subconscious still put the fact that your grandfather was hurt into the idea that the monsters got him. So you temporarily saw a monster that wasn't there. So then they start talking about how his grandfather was in this children's home when he was younger, and we later find out that he ended up in this children's home during World War II, when the Nazis were attacking. And they kind of pieced together that maybe these monsters he's been talking about were actually the Nazis. And we later find out that once he was old enough, he left the children's home and joined the military to fight the Nazis. So it's kind of like, was any of the grandfather's stories actually true, or was it just his way of coping with the fact that he lived through the Nazi invasion and people he loved died and things like that? And he has these photos of all these peculiar children, like the Invisible Boy and things like that. And the grandson eventually took them to school for show and tell one day and was kind of telling the story. And the teacher kind of told him, your grandpa may have told you these and you may have believed they were true, but they're not. These joke photos of invisible children and things like that were kind of popular back in the 40s. And things like that. They're trick photography. It was early days of trick photography. So you could find a lot of these in really old, yard sales and flea markets and things like that. And your grandpa probably just picked them up on one of his travels around the world, when he was in the military, and made up these stories around the photos. So they decide that for a bit of closure, they're going to go to the children's home where his grandfather was raised and, see if anyone is still there, and kind of get the true story behind everything, and, kind of let them know his grandfather had passed, and, just kind of put closure on the whole thing. So they get there, and they go to find the children's home, only to find it's been completely destroyed. So they go back to the hotel, and there's this one older guy there, and the boys kind of ask him, what happened to the children's home, and he says it was on this date in, I think it was 1943, the Germans attacked and dropped their bombs all over the town, and one of them hit directly on the children's home, and it was destroyed. And he asks, well, what about all the children that were living there? And he says, everyone perished on that day. So then we start to piece together that maybe the grandfather was making up these stories about all these peculiar children because he was in denial about him leaving to join the war effort and not being there when his family was killed, and having a form of regret for that, and that's why he made up these stories about all the abilities that these kids had, because that way it kind of kept them alive in his heart. So at first you're like, wow, this is actually going to be kind of a dark film in that regards. Was the grandfather actually suffering from dementia? Was it all just in his head and made up? And then about 2 minutes later, when you're kind of questioning everything the grandfather just said, all the kids show up. And they start talking to the boy. They take him into a time loop where it's 1943 forever, and they're all still alive. The house is still there. They live out their day. At the end of the day, they reverse time back to the start of the day. And then they just live out their lives over and over. They still have all their memories from as each day passes. They don't just repeatedly do the same things over and over again. Like they have certain chores that they're supposed to do. Like this baby squirrel falls out of a tree, so it's one girl's job to every day at that time, catch the squirrel and put it back in the tree. But she doesn't just do it mindlessly. She actually remembers that she's done it millions of times before, and they know that they're stuck in this time loop. They know that they don't age. They know that they kind of repeat the same day over and over. So it's not one of those things where everything just keeps looping back and everyone keeps forgetting. It's just that they're stuck there. Can they leave? Yes. Do they want to leave? Not necessarily, because they have strange abilities that the outside world wouldn't really understand, and they would be kind of shunned because of them. So this happens all over the world. Peculiar children are in different time loops all over the world. They don't all just live in one. And that's just kind of the accepted lifestyle for a peculiar child, that they just remove themselves from the world so that they're not exposed and they're not hunted and things like that. Okay, so turns out Grandpa was right about everything. He wasn't crazy. And then it just kind of follows suit with that. The headmistress, Miss Peregrine, she's kind of distant about things, and at first you can kind of tell that she has some questionable intentions towards this boy now that he showed up, because the way she acts when he asks certain questions, she just kind of gets real distant about it. And then, as he's like, okay, whatever, and walks away, she kind of gives this dirty look, so you're kind of like, what is she up to? Is she actually like a bad guy here? What's going on? The next third of the movie, basically, the entire second act, is this boy getting to know all the children, staying at the house for a while, then he goes back into the regular world, and his dad's like, where were you? I told you not to go to that house anymore. You don't need to be hanging out in that dilapidated building. You're going to get hurt. Just stay in the hotel. For the rest of the time we're here, you're going to stay in the hotel. You're not going to go out and do anything unless I'm with you. So the dad's like, kind of a real dick about it, and the dad's intentions are never really made clear, whether or not he knows all these things were true and he's trying to protect his son from it, or if he's just that fucking ignorant. Like, the dad's this bird watcher, and I guess he's a novelist, so he's writing a book about the birds of the world, and he gets to this island, and he's going to go look at all their unique birds, and it turns out there's another guy there who's also taking photos of all the birds and is also writing a book. So then the dad's just like, oh, well, if he's already writing the book, I guess no one's ever going to read mine. And he just, goes to the bar and, spends the day getting drunk. And the kid's like, okay, I'm not going to sit here and watch you get drunk all day. I'm going to go out and do something. He's like, no, you're going to stay here. So then finally the dad passes out, so the kid's like, okay, I'm out of here, and takes off again. And then he returns to the real world, or the real time, I should say, and then the dad's right there like, where were you? I told you not to leave. It's like, you got drunk and passed out. What the hell is this kid supposed to do? Just sit there and watch you sleep? I mean, seriously. The dad is the most, I don't know, he's the character that bothers me the most out of everyone. So then after about the third visit to the time loop, the boy finally gets told the story about what's actually going on, who the big bads are, And he's kind of torn between whether or not he wants to stay with the children or go back to his normal life. And he's kind of like, I don't really have a peculiar ability, so I don't really feel that I should stay here, especially when I can go, my normal life may not be that great, but it's my life. So at first he's going to leave, and he's like, I'll come back and visit someday, maybe when I'm a little bit older, whatever. And turns out that through his constant visiting and going back, he's actually led the big bad to the time loop, which they have trouble finding. They hunt out all these time loops and basically kill everyone in them. Spoiler, by the way. But they've had trouble finding this one until this boy led them there. And then you later find out how the big bad's been manipulating everything and how he's kind of forced the kid's hand into leading him to this time loop, and why everything's going on, why they're killing all the peculiar children. And then it kind of plays out like any normal teen adventure movie or tween adventure movie. The headmistress kind of goes missing, and the kids have to band together and try and mount a rescue mission using their abilities. And from that point, it kind of plays out like how you would expect. I'm not going to tell you exactly how it ends, but you could probably figure it out for the most part. Like I said, at this point, it's kind of every other tween movie that's ever existed. I will say it's not as bad as Twilight or any of that crap, but it plays out in a fashion that you would figure it would play out in. Yeah, that kind of wraps up the movie. Obviously, it's targeted for tweens, so it has a happy ending. Everything kind of resolves. I'm not going to tell you exactly what happens, but it's a movie. There's a happy ending. Deal with it. I don't think Hollywood knows how to make a movie that doesn't have a happy ending, except for like horror movies where everyone dies. But usually, even then, you have one character that survives, and that's your happy ending in a horror film. It's never just, the killer kills everyone and that's it. So what would I give it as far as a star rating? Like I said, I like the first act of it where you're kind of questioning, the grandfather's sanity and whether or not all this stuff actually happened, or if it's going to turn into a lot more of a mature themed look at the psyche of an old man where he lived through the Nazi invasion, his entire, what he knew as his family was wiped out, and him making up these stories to kind of deal with the grief of that until it led into dementia. And that was actually fairly intriguing to me if they would have continued that route. At the same time, I can see where it might have become a little bit more of a boring film if you're just like breaking down like, yeah, your grandpa was nuts. But at the same time, I honestly see where it could have been a lot more interesting of a film as well. But because a third of the way through it just shifted into this whole other kids movie type of thing, it loses a little bit for me. I mean, like I said, going forward in this story, if they're going to do more, I could see where it could eventually become as good as like a Harry Potter series, because, like I said, the first Harry Potter film, the Sorcerer's Stone or Philosopher's Stone, whichever you know it as, like the first time I watched that, I was like, okay, I really don't see what all the hype about Harry Potter is, but then I watched the others just to see, maybe the story gets better as they get older, and it did. I mean, I ended up liking the entire Harry Potter series, but still going back and watching the first one, you're kind of like, this is heavily targeted towards small children, but then as it progresses and as the characters get older, they start to deal with more mature themes, and the stories actually grow with the audience, which is what I liked about Harry Potter. This one kind of fits into that Philosopher's Stone or Sorcerer's Stone type of thing where it's okay for what it is, but it's targeted at a younger audience than what I am. So it loses a little bit of its rating from me based on that. Like I said, had it gone with the more mature themes that it was starting with and just kind of kept playing on those and kind of realized that yes, there were these bad guys, but maybe they weren't the monsters that the grandfather thought, and kind of break down like how he envisioned each one of them as monsters. Like, okay, let's take the Invisible Boy, for example. He spends the majority of this movie, you can't see him because half the time he's running around naked, and like he'll randomly bump into somebody and they're like, go put some clothes on so people can know where you're at. And they could have played with that idea that, this character that their grandfather created as the Invisible Boy was just one of the kids in the home who refused to wear clothing. Of course, you're dealing with young children, so you wouldn't be able to show very much of that, but, they could have played with that idea of, they called him the Invisible Boy because his clothes were always invisible. He, or something like, played with that idea. The girl who's supposedly lighter than air and can float, they just have it to where she had, like an odd deformity or something where she had to wear these heavily soled shoes. Like I have a relative who was in an accident and it caused one of his legs to be shortened. He basically still has a working leg, but they had to remove a section of it. Kind of like Hank Hill's dad from King of the Hill, where they reattached his feet to his knees or whatever, and he lost his shins. That's kind of what this relative has. So in order for him to walk normal, he has this one boot that he wears on his shorter leg that has a built-up heel on it. And it kind of looks like a Frankenstein boot almost, but that's what he needs in order to walk normal. So they could have just had, something like that with her, why she wears these weighted shoes, and, she has some deformity where she has to wear them. And so the grandfather made up the story that if she ever took them off, she'd float away. They could have played around more with that idea. But instead, they're just like, no, monsters are real. These kids actually have these powers. Okay, yeah, I get that. Again, like I said, it's a kid's movie, kind of Harry Potter-ish. Like I said, I would have liked to have seen them explore the mature themes a little bit more and kind of broke down like how they related to the child aspect, and maybe even have the kid who, because he's in therapy, we kind of know he's already kind of seen things that aren't there, and maybe have him actually see these monsters actually being there, where everyone else is like, no, it's just a kid with an odd deformity or something. And it would still relate into what, spoilers, the main character's ability ends up being. That, again, spoilers, that there are some monsters that are invisible, but only he can see them. And maybe have that be that these monsters do exist, but to everyone else, they seem to have a semi-human form with just a slight abnormality, but to him, he can actually see their true form, and that's why everyone thinks he's got these mental issues. So like I said, they could have played around a lot with that, instead of just like, yep, everything's real, now this is a tween movie. But they didn't. They just went with, yeah, it's a tween movie. So it loses a little bit with me for that. So what would I give it overall as a star rating? Maybe a 3. I mean, like I said, it's not bad. It's just they could have done something more with it to where it felt more like the later Harry Potter films than the early Harry Potter films, if that makes sense. I don't want to knock it down to a 2.5 because, like I said, it wasn't a horrible film. It wasn't like Twilight or The Host bad or anything like that. Like I said, it was like Harry Potter year 1 as opposed to Harry Potter year 4 to 7. So yeah, I'm going to give it just a middle of the road, a 3. Not much else to say about it other than that. This getting kind of long, so I want to wrap it up. But yeah, so that's it. It gets a 3. So there you have it. That's my review of Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. Again, sorry if I got the name wrong. As always, thank you guys for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, share the video. Links are in the description. And until next time, we'll see you after the credits.